Hello everyone, Dr. Polaris here. Before I get going with the main subject of this episode, I'd like to just thank everyone that came out and really engaged with the previous video, making it the most watched entry on my channel for quite some time now. As that episode focused on the troodontids, it seemed only natural to follow it up by covering their infamous sickle-clawed cousins, the Dromaeosaurids. These famous Paravian Theropods were first scientifically recognised during the early 20th century, although remained relatively obscure until the late 1960s, when the description of the genus Deinonychus helped to usher in the so-called dinosaur renaissance, whereupon non-avian dinosaurs were gradually reinterpreted as active, dynamic animals, in contrast to the previously dominant image of sluggish, tail-dragging evolutionary dead ends. Then, by the late 80s and early 90s, Dromaeosaurids were further catapulted into pop culture stardom due to the massive success of Michael Crichton's novel Jurassic Park and its subsequent iconic film adaptation. With heavily fictionalised 6-foot-tall and hyper-intelligent velociraptors starring as the main villains in both works, the Jurassic Park franchise also helped to spread the central ideas of the dinosaur renaissance to a much wider audience, cementing the image of scaly, intelligent, pack-hunting dromaeosaurs, or quote-unquote raptors, in the minds of many a 90s kid. Later discoveries revealed that these very bird-like animals were even more bird-like than was previously assumed, with fossil finds from Liaoning Province, China, revealing that Dromaeosaurids possessed feathery coats. In addition, this family of dinosaurs are today generally interpreted as mostly solitary, with the larger members of the group essentially resembling hybrids of monitor lizards and birds of prey, hunting and killing targets like terrestrial hawks and eagles, before tearing it apart with serrated blade-like teeth. These animals were close relatives of both troodontids and members of Avialae, with Dromaeosaurids almost certainly first diverging during the late Jurassic period, at least 160 million years ago. However, unlike their close cousins, no definitive body fossils belonging to the family have so far been recovered from the period, although isolated teeth that may belong to Dromaeosaurids have been described from the Middle Jurassic Age deposits in the UK. These animals would have strongly resembled the early members of Avialae and Troodontidae in appearance, with feathery coats, enlarged sickle claws on the second toes of the feet, relatively long arms that could be folded against the body in some species, and forward-facing eyes that would provide a degree of binocular vision. The composition of Dromaeosauridae is quite controversial, with it generally being assumed that the odd and perhaps semi-aquatic Hauscaraptorines, as well as the long-snouted Gondwan and Ununlagenes, were basal members of this family, although these have sometimes been classified elsewhere within the clade Paraves. Also, as I've already covered these animals before, in addition to the small and sometimes volant Macroevolutions, this video will be focusing on the larger and more derived Eudromaeosaurs. This clade first appears in the fossil record during the early Cretaceous period, circa 139 million years ago, and were hypercarnivores that were capable of taking on bigger prey items than other members of the family, which generally specialised in hunting smaller animals. When compared to other Maniraptoran dinosaurs, Eudromaeosaurs possess solidly built skulls that were significantly less pneumatic than those of Oviraptorosaurs, for example, as well as generally stockier hind limbs, sharper and more blade-like sickle claws, in addition to stronger bite forces than their troodontid cousins. These animals are usually divided into three major subfamilies, with these being the Velociraptorines, Saurornitholestines, and Dromaeosaurines, although the exact composition of each is highly unstable and subject to change depending on the particular study in question. I'm not exactly sure why this should be the case, but it's a problem also seen in the classification of the Titanosaurian sauropods as well. Among the oldest potential Eudromaeosaurs include the genus Neuthetes from the early Cretaceous Lulworth Formation of the UK, and the Ongenac-Charente bone bed of France circa 143 million years ago. Although this taxon is only known from isolated teeth, and these have been suggested to more likely belong to a basal tyrannosauroid instead. Of the three subfamilies, the Velociraptorians are often considered to have the most basal body types among Eudromaeosaurs, being generally small and slender in build and possessing low, narrow and elongated snouts. The type genus for this group was, of course, the infamous Velociraptor. although I'm sure that most of my viewers will already know that the real animal looked very different from the theme park monsters featured in the Jurassic Park franchise, native to Mongolia between 75 and 71 million years ago. The species Velociraptor mongoliensis was first named all the way back in 1924, and was a roughly turkey-sized carnivore that measured about 2 metres or 6.6 feet long. It would have weighed in the region of 14 to 19 kilograms, or up to 43 pounds, which is comparable to modern domestic dog breeds such as the Springer Spaniel or Staffordshire Bull Terrier. The greatly enlarged versions featured in Jurassic Park were instead more heavily based on the significantly larger genus Deinonychus. With over a dozen known specimens, some of which are near complete, Velociraptor remains one of the best studied of all dromaeosaurs. As already mentioned, this animal possessed slender narrow jaws, and its bite force quotient has been estimated at around 300 newtons, which is significantly less than that produced by Dromaeosaurus and Deinonychus. This indicates that Velociraptor mostly fed on small prey items such as lizards, mammals and hatchling dinosaurs. Although a recent 2024 study found that this genus had a surprisingly high bite force resistance, indicating that it may have engaged in frequent scavenging of larger animals. This is supported by a 2012 study by Dave Hone and colleagues that described a Velociraptor specimen with a long bone of an Asdarchid pterosaur in the gut region. Such behaviour would have been highly beneficial given the harsh, drought-prone desert ecosystems in which this carnivore lived. While the distinctive sickle claws on the second toes were once viewed as slashing weapons utilised for tearing open the flanks of herbivores like Protoceratops, it's instead far more likely that Velociraptor and other dromaeosaurs hunted their prey in a similar manner to modern hawks and eagles, pouncing on the target and restraining it with their strong taloned hind feet before essentially eating the unfortunate animal alive. One remarkable specimen, which has come to be known as the fighting dinosaurs, was uncovered in 1971 and consisted of the near-complete remains of a Protoceratops and Velociraptor that died together while locked in combat. Probably as the result of a collapsing sand dune, the significantly heavier sheep-sized herbivore had successfully knocked the predator onto its side, clamping its beaked jaws down onto the Dromaeosaurid's right forelimb. While the carnivore was attempting to puncture the ceratopsian's throat with one of its sickle claws, this specimen provided active proof that Velociraptor actually hunted Protoceratops, although just how common an occurrence this was remains uncertain. In addition, recent studies have demonstrated that this genus possessed large pennaceous feathers on the forelimbs, while the rest of the body would mostly have been covered in an insulating, shaggier coat. Like other Paravian non-avian dinosaurs, Velociraptor and other Dromaeosaurids would have been endotherms, although they seem to have possessed slower metabolisms than most modern birds and mammals, with it being found that kiwis represent good models for early members of Avialae and Dromaeosaurs in this respect. A close relative of Velociraptor, the genus Shri-devi, was first described in 2021, with an additional species, Shri-rapax, being named 4 years later. Also native to the Mongolian Jatochka Formation, these animals were overall quite similar to Velociraptor in size and appearance, although did possess shorter and more robust snouts than the latter, indicating a stronger bite and therefore a different ecological niche. Other dromaeosaurs that are often classified as being velociraptorines include the genus Sargan, once again from the Campanian Jatochka Formation, as well as the contemporary Linnean, which was native to the Wulanshai Formation of Inner Mongolia. While all these animals were native to what is now Mongolia and China, potentially the oldest member of Velociraptorinae, the genus Kansai was endemic to the Santonian Age Yalavach Formation of Tajikistan between 86 and 83 million years ago, being the only non-avian dinosaur from the country to receive a scientific name. Another potential member of the subfamily, Dinio has been recovered from the late Maastrichtian Oja Alamo Formation of New Mexico, with this animal possibly being the largest and youngest Velociraptorine, with its overall length estimated to have been comparable to Deinonychus. The remaining two subfamilies tended to possess shorter and more robust jaws, with the Sauronitholestines being the more recently established group. These animals were seemingly endemic to North America, in contrast to their mostly Asiatic Velociraptorine cousins. As with all of the Dromaeosaurid subfamilies, the exact composition of Sauronitholestinae remains highly debated, with only one unambiguous member, the type genus Sauronitholestes. This widespread animal was native to what is now Canada and the United States over a surprisingly long time period that stretched from circa 83 to 66 million years ago. Although some fragmentary specimens may need to be reclassified in the future, in addition to its range in Laramidia, Sauronitholestes also seems to have dwelt in Appalachia as well, demonstrating the clearly adaptable nature of this genus. It was a relatively slender, long-legged animal, at least in comparison to other Dromaeosaurids, that was slightly shorter than Velociraptor in overall length, being up to 1.8 metres or 5 feet 11 inches long. Studies of the skull and jaws have found that this genus possessed a strong sense of smell and was capable of feeding on bone, with this ability to scavenge being supported by a tooth of Sauronitholestes found embedded in the wing bone of a large pterosaur, possibly a juvenile Quetzalcoatlus. In addition to being widespread and long-lived, this genus appears to have been the most common small theropod in the Dinosaur Provincial Park, with its teeth and bones being far more common than those of its more robust contemporary Dromaeosaurus. Another animal often considered to be a member of Sauronitholesdae is the genus Atrociraptor, which was native to the early Maastrichtian of the Drumheller Formation of Alberta, Canada. It was roughly equivalent in size to Sauronitholestes, but can be differentiated from that genus by its deeper and more robust snout, as well as its teeth, which are more strongly inclined backwards than most other eudromaeosaurs. This all indicates that Atrociraptor was well adapted for hunting prey larger than itself, in a similar manner to the much older genus Deinonychus. Potential prey items for this animal would include the Oviraptorosaur Apatoraptor, the Pachycephalosaurid Spherotholus, and the Thescelosaurid Parksosaurus. A more controversial potential Sauronitholestine is the genus Bambiraptor, which is known from a small juvenile holotype specimen from the Campanian II Medicine Formation of Montana that measured about 1 metre or 3 feet long. This juvenile was very lightly built, with highly elongated forelimbs and hindlimbs, as well as a proportionally large brain. Partial adult specimens found near the holotype were significantly larger, perhaps measuring up to 3.5 metres long, although their overall size is difficult to establish due to the fragmentary nature of the remains. The final subfamily of Dromaeosaurids were the Dromaeosaurians themselves, representatives of which were among the oldest well-known members of the family as a whole, and were native to both Eurasia and North America. These animals were often more robust than the Velociraptorians and Sauronitholestines, with heavily built skulls equipped with teeth that were serrated on both sides. The oldest Dromaeosaurians were native to the early Cretaceous Cedar Mountain Formation of Utah between 139 and 134 million years ago, with the most impressive of these being the enormous genus Utahraptor, the largest Dromaeosaurid so far known. This predator could reach up to 6 metres or 20 feet long and weighed in the region of 500 kilograms, making it roughly comparable to a modern polar bear in size. With a heavy build and powerful stocky limbs, Utahraptor was an ambush hunter built for grappling with relatively large prey, pouncing on them and gripping them in place with its almost 10-inch long sickle claws. The skull was similarly robust, being blocky and almost rectangular in shape, almost resembling that of a megalosaurid, and was similarly adapted for tearing chunks of flesh from its prey. It's since been suggested that Utahraptor may have been a social animal, as the remains of multiple individuals have been recovered from the same sites, although exactly what kind of behaviour this represents is not clear. The Cedar Mountain Formation was also home to a diverse range of herbivores that would certainly have been on the menu for this Dromaeosaurid, including the basal Therizinosaur Fulcarius, the ornithopod Hippodraco, and the modestly sized Titanosaur Mierosaurus, with Utahraptor being the largest predator in this environment, although isolated allosauroid teeth have also been found here as well. It was a contemporary of the far smaller Dromaeosaurian Yergovutia, although it must be said that both it and Utahraptor have been classified elsewhere within the Dromaeosaurid family tree in certain studies. Yergovutia would have measured about 2.5 metres or 8.2 feet long, and was likely a hunter of small vertebrates, filling a niche similar to that of Velociraptor. Another genus sometimes classified as a basal Dromaeosaurian was the iconic Deinonychus, an animal that I've already covered on this channel before, so I won't go into too much detail here. This leopard-sized land eagle was native to much of what is now the United States during the mid-Cretaceous, and was specialised for hunting relatively large prey, such as the Ornithischian Tenontosaurus, possessing a robust skull and blade-like teeth that were used in a similar manner to modern monitor lizards, biting down and then wrenching the neck backwards. Members of this genus were quite possibly gregarious, and may have practiced ratite-like parental care of their young, laying bluish-green oval-shaped eggs in nests that were brooded by either one or both parents. Other slightly younger dromaeosaurians were even larger, such as the stocky genus Achillobeta from the Bayan Shireh Formation of Mongolia between 96 and 89 million years ago, only slightly smaller than Utahraptor and possessing similar robust body proportions. This ambush predator could reach 5 meters or 16 feet long, and weighed in at up to 300 kilograms or 660 pounds, comparable to a very large male Siberian tiger. Living in a humid, well-watered forested ecosystem, it would have hunted animals such as the therizinosaurs Duonicus and Erlikosaurus, as well as the hadrosaur Gobihadros. The type genus for this subfamily, Dromaeosaurus itself, was a much smaller animal and was native to Campanian and Maastrichtian Canada and the western United States. Although roughly the same size as Velociraptor, Dromaeosaurus notably possessed a significantly deeper and more robust snout, allowing it to tackle prey larger than itself. Despite being a relatively famous animal, Dromaeosaurus is actually known from pretty scrappy material, although thankfully nowhere near as scrappy as its potential chimeric close relative, the ever-frustrating Dakotaraptor. This large yet slender potential Dromaeosaurid was announced to great fanfare in the mid-2010s, representing a mid-sized predator from the Hell Creek Formation that had up to that point been deficient of such an animal, potentially measuring up to 6 meters long. It's since been hypothesized that Dakotaraptor may have been a chimeric taxon, with associated furculi found to belong to the fragmented plastron of a trichonychid turtle, while the holotype may lack key traits that define it as a Dromaeosaurid. Unfortunately, it's currently impossible for paleontologists to investigate these issues further, as the fossils are housed in a private collection, so the TLDR here is that there was probably a relatively large Dromaeosaurid native to the Hell Creek Formation, but there's simply not enough diagnostic information to tell whether this genus was valid or not. Whatever Dakotaraptor was, it, along with the contemporary Acheroraptor and the similarly aged Dinobellator, were among the last Dromaeosaurids. In addition to the Velociraptorian Luanchuan raptor from Hainan Province, China, filling ecological niches similar to modern cats, jackals and coyotes, while resembling flightless birds of prey, albeit ones with toothy jaws instead of beaks and stiff elongated tails, Dromaeosaurs would have been beautifully uncanny animals, being so close to birds, and yet retaining enough reptilian traits to throw our brains off. They developed the ability to hunt larger prey than their troodontid cousins, but as a trade-off, they sacrificed running ability and the potential to develop omnivorous diets. Sadly, this group died out alongside all other non-avian dinosaurs circa 66 million years ago, although if by some miracle they had managed to survive into the Holocene, we would almost certainly think of them as being weird toothy birds. Thanks for watching everyone. The next episode will be covering the early evolution of the ankylosaurs, so until then I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.